Imagine being 3 times richer than Jeff Bezos, or having so much power that the US government must create special laws just to control your company. That was the reality of John D. Rockefeller. At his peak, Rockefeller's fortune was equivalent to 1.5% of the entire US economy, about $280 billion today, thanks to his company Standard Oil, which controlled 90% of the country's refineries and pipelines during the boom in oil demand. Most of the great family fortunes fade with the generations. Only 10% usually survive the third. However, the Rockefeller family remains one of the richest today, with a combined net worth estimated at $10.3 billion. Although almost all of your wealth was obtained legally, legal doesn't always mean ethical. This is the story of John D. Rockefeller, the man who a century ago personified wealth and power in America, from humble beginnings in the business. John D. Rockefeller was born in 1839 in Richford, New York, into a humble family. As a child, nothing predicted that he would be one of the most influential characters in the country. His father, William Avery Rockefeller, was a con man who led a double life, even with a second family in secret, not at all exemplary. Instead, his mother was a devout Baptist who instilled in John discipline and charity. The family moved several times before settling in Cleveland, Ohio in 1853. Young John was serious and hardworking. He attended school a few months of the year, and the rest helped with rural chores on the family farm. Nothing in his childhood anticipated the immense wealth he would achieve. In fact, his first job was very modest. At age 16, he dropped out of high school and landed a position as an accounting assistant at a small Cleveland firm, earning just 50 cents a day. From the beginning, he showed great discipline. He kept track of every penny and donated part of his salary to the church. After a few years of saving, at 18, she gathered the courage and the capital to start on her own. In 1859, coinciding with the drilling of the first commercial oil well in the U.S., Rockefeller and a partner founded the Rockefeller and Clark Company, dedicated to the trade of grains, meat, and also petroleum products. Cleveland proved to be an ideal location because of its proximity to the new oil fields in Pennsylvania and its good rail connections, making it a refining hub. In 1863, with the profits obtained, Rockefeller and his partners opened their own oil refinery in Cleveland, thus entering a sector that would soon experience a real boom. The rise of Standard Oil, strategic vision, and ruthless tactics. In 1865, just 2 years after opening his refinery, Rockefeller decided to assume full control. He bought his partner's share for $72,500, a huge sum at the time, borrowing heavily to achieve it. He then sought financial support. He convinced wealthy Stephen Harkness to invest $100,000 as a silent partner on the condition that Henry Flagler, a relative of Harkness's with great organizational talent, would be brought on board as an operating partner. The move turned out to be brilliant. Flagler brought entrepreneurial creativity, while Rockefeller imposed his financial rigor. In 1870, at just 31 years old, Rockefeller transformed his firm into the Standard Oil Company Corporation, laying the foundation for an unprecedented oil empire. Rockefeller's strategy was as innovative as it was forceful. Instead of taking risks in the exploration of wells, he focused on oil refining, a more stable business with constant income. Obsessed with cutting costs and taking advantage of every byproduct, he hired the best chemists and engineers to find profitable uses for oil waste. In this way, products such as petroleum jelly and other derivatives emerged. He even acquired oil fields with high-sulfur crude oil that no one else wanted, and funded research to purify that oil. The result? It turned low-quality crude into usable fuel, generating huge profits. That ability to find value where others see only waste was a hallmark of Rockefeller. Standard Oil's real leap came with aggressive business expansion. Rockefeller perfected the art of monopoly in an era with few legal restrictions. It grew on two fronts: horizontally, buying rival refineries, and vertically controlling wells, pipelines, railroads, and outlets. In the so-called Cleveland Massacre of 1872, he seized 22 of the city's 26 rival refineries. Some he bought at a fair price, and others he went bankrupt. Standard Oil was growing rapidly, reinvesting all of its profits and borrowing massively to finance more acquisitions. In just a decade, Rockefeller went from being a local entrepreneur to dominating most of the national oil industry. By 1880, Standard Oil controlled about 90% of the oil business in the United States. Total monopoly and public reaction. Rockefeller's dominance over oil became almost total, but his methods made him enemies. Standard Oil not only grew by buying competitors but also employed then legal but ethically dubious practices to strangle anyone who opposed it. For example, he secretly negotiated huge discounts with railroads in exchange for guaranteeing them massive volumes of cargo. With those preferential rates, well below those paid by its rivals, Standard Oil could sell kerosene cheaper than anyone else and stifle the competition. This scheme came to light in 1872 with the Southern Improvement Company scandal, a collusive agreement between refiners and railroads to share routes and rates. When it became known, the public outrage was such that the plan was canceled. Rockefeller learned that even he could not stand against the fury of public opinion. As Standard Oil grew, Rockefeller became a feared and hated figure. The press demonized him. A famous cartoon from 1904 portrayed him as a giant octopus strangling industries, steel, copper, shipping companies, taking over state legislatures, the U.S. Capitol, and even trying to envelop the White House. This image summed up popular sentiment. Standard Oil was a tentacled monster in everything from the economy to government. And it wasn't just a caricature. Rockefeller had actually diversified his empire into sectors such as iron, railroads, and banking. He and his brother controlled part of Chase Bank. He also wielded political influence behind the scenes through lobbies, bribes, and favors, common practices of the time. This business conduct ultimately had consequences. In the late 19th century, investigative journalists, the muckrakers, emerged to expose Standard Oil. The most famous was journalist Ida Tarbell, whose father was ruined by Standard Oil, which in 1904 called him the most hated man in America and described him as bald and haggard, one of the saddest objects in the world. Under social and political pressure, the government finally acted. In 1890, the first antitrust law, the Sherman Act, was passed, but it took time to implement it. Finally, in 1911, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Standard Oil violated the law and ordered the company to be dismantled within 6 months. Standard Oil fragmented into 34 independent companies, several of which would end up being energy giants such as ExxonMobil, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, or BP. Paradoxically, the breakup increased Rockefeller's personal wealth. Each new company prospered on its own, and the shares he retained skyrocketed in value. Overnight, he became the first billionaire in the U.S., with a fortune equivalent to almost 2% of the national GDP. By then, Rockefeller had already ceded the day-to-day management of the company. He retired from management in 1897 at the age of 58, and after the ruling of 1911, he completely resigned from the presidency. He was 72 years old and in fragile health, but he still had one last vital chapter to write. Philanthropy, the redemptive tycoon. Exhausted by decades of public pressure and aware of his unpopularity, Rockefeller pivoted to philanthropy. In his last years at the head of Standard Oil, he had already begun to donate significant sums, but after the dissolution of his monopoly, charity became his main activity. In 1913, he founded the Rockefeller Foundation, to which he devoted a substantial portion of his fortune, ushering in a new era of large-scale philanthropy in the U.S. From the beginning, the Rockefeller Foundation focused on 3 areas: public health, education, and scientific research. The magnitude of his contributions was unprecedented. For example, he donated millions to found the University of Chicago, established in 1890, which within a decade was already competing among the best in the world. He also created the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research in New York, now Rockefeller University, the first biomedical research institute in the United States. Thanks to their donations, vaccines against meningitis and yellow fever were developed, saving countless lives. He funded campaigns to eradicate diseases such as hookworm in the southern U.S. and fights against malaria, yellow fever, and typhus internationally. In the field of education, the Rockefeller Foundation modernized medical training, influencing the famous Flexner Report, and established schools of public health at universities such as Johns Hopkins and Harvard. Rockefeller's philanthropic initiatives were not limited to the U.S. They had a strong global impact. Over time, the Rockefeller Foundation became involved in agriculture and food projects, leading the so-called Green Revolution in the mid-20th century. This initiative introduced new grain varieties, fertilizers, and irrigation techniques to the developing world, preventing mass famines. The Green Revolution, fueled in part by Rockefeller funding, is estimated to have saved up to 1 billion lives by increasing food production in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Norman Borlaug, a scientist linked to those programs, won the Nobel Peace Prize for this achievement. Rockefeller took philanthropy to a gigantic scale, intentionally spending much of his wealth on it. By 1912, his personal fortune had reached about $900 million, nearly 3% of the then U.S. GDP. However, by the time he died in 1937, at age 97, his estate had dwindled to just $26 million. This does not mean that he lost money, but that he donated almost all of it in life. It is estimated that Rockefeller gave about $900 million to charitable causes over the course of his lifetime. He himself stated that he felt it was God's will that he should earn a lot of money to be used for the public good. Despite cynics who suggest that he did so, he whitewashed his image or took advantage of tax benefits, the positive legacy of these donations is undeniable. Rockefeller's philanthropy transformed medicine, education, and science, creating a model that other tycoons imitated. Of course, his motivations could have been mixed: deep religious convictions, a desire to redeem his name after criticism, tax advantages for funneling his money to exempt foundations, and even an interest in influencing politics through charity. In fact, the Rockefeller Foundation, for all the good it did, also ended up serving as a tool of U.S. soft power in the world, a legacy that endures, wealth and influence beyond oil. More than a century later, the Rockefeller surname is still synonymous with power. Although John D. Rockefeller donated much of his fortune, it did not mean the ruin of his lineage. On the contrary, the Rockefellers have managed to preserve and grow their wealth over the generations. The combined wealth of the family, distributed among around 200 descendants, is currently estimated at about $10.3 billion. Some suspect that it could be even higher, since they handle many investments through private entities. A prominent member was David Rockefeller, grandson of John D. He became president of Chase Bank, and when he died in 2017 at the age of 101, he was the oldest billionaire in the world, with a personal fortune of about $3.3 billion. How have the Rockefellers managed to maintain their wealth for so many generations, defying the curse of the third generation? The answer is sophisticated wealth management that John D. himself initiated. In 1882, he established the first modern family office, with professionals dedicated exclusively to the family's financial affairs. This office was in charge of managing the fortune as an integral portfolio to prevent it from being dispersed. In addition, the Rockefellers used irrevocable trusts to protect their assets. By housing much of the wealth in trusts passed down from generation to generation, they shielded the estate from inheritance taxes, lawsuits, or waste. Another key piece was the waterfall method in estate planning, using life insurance to transfer wealth while avoiding estate taxes. With these legal tactics, the Rockefeller fortune passed to dozens of descendants with minimal losses. Not everyone could afford such financial sophistication. To a large extent, the Rockefellers wrote the manual of how to preserve a fortune, which many other wealthy families imitated. For decades, the Rockefeller Trust was cited as a model of good wealth management. In short, they knew how to institutionalize their fortune and manage it almost as a long-term oriented company, with diversification and professionals at the helm. The Rockefellers' power was not only economic, it also manifested itself in American politics. From the 1950s to 2015, there was always a Rockefeller in positions of high relevance. Nelson Rockefeller was governor of New York and then vice president of the U.S. under Gerald Ford. His brother Winthrop ruled Arkansas, and his nephew Jay Rockefeller was a senator from West Virginia for 30 years until 2015. After Jay's retirement, that era of direct influence came to an end. In addition, the family forged ties with other dynasties. They were related to the Aldrichs and the Stillmans, banking magnates. This network of connections between money and power further strengthened his influence. Rockefeller's influence was also exerted through international philanthropy. During the Cold War, the Rockefeller Foundation was an ideological actor. In the post-war period, for example, he funded programs in France to strengthen liberal democracy and make communism less attractive among the intellectual elite. Similarly, it channeled funds into initiatives related to Western interests in other countries. In general, huge foundations such as Rockefeller or Gates are accused of using their wealth to set the global agenda according to their priorities. By promoting public-private partnerships in health or agriculture, they promote certain technologies that benefit private companies to the detriment of more comprehensive solutions. In the field of global health, the combined influence of Rockefeller and Gates is said to be so great that it redefines global health policies, privileging vertical interventions for profit over the strengthening of public systems. In short, while Rockefeller's philanthropy has brought enormous benefits, it is not without controversy. According to various critics, these ultra-wealthy philanthropists could fragment global governance and weaken democracy by acting without sufficient public scrutiny. John D. Rockefeller was a master of capitalism of his time. He exploited the rules to the maximum to amass a colossal fortune, even twisting them in his favor, as with the Standard Oil Trust. At the same time, it transformed the energy sector by bringing cheap light, kerosene, to millions of homes. His philanthropic side redefined how tycoons give back to society, creating enduring institutions in medicine, education, and science, with which he saved lives, founded universities, and improved global well-being. His enormous fortune was built at the cost of brutal monopolistic tactics. He crushed countless small businessmen, manipulated prices, and corrupted markets. Their actions expose the dark side of unbridled capitalism, concentrating wealth and power in a single hand at unimaginable levels. For every advance in efficiency or distribution that Standard Oil made, there were affected communities and ruined competitors. Rockefeller thus embodies the duality of the philanthropic capitalist. On the one hand, the thief baron, who provoked public indignation; on the other, the visionary patron who financed human progress. Rockefeller's legacy forces us to reflect on the tension between private wealth and the public good. He was a man of extremes. He provoked deep social resentment, but also pushed for lasting improvements. Today, his story must be taken with caution. We can admire his achievements, but with a grain of salt, aware that they were possible because he knew how to bend the system to his will. John D. Rockefeller defined both the shadows and the lights of American capitalism, and his influence in wealth, family, and philanthropy is felt generations later.